Doug has left us, so now it's just me and Julian left to talk about the Charlotte Hornets. And speak of the devil, right? We were just talking about the Atlanta Hawks during the last segment, kind of making that comparison of a young team finding themselves in the postseason and then actually getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, something the Charlotte Hornets have never done before. Could this be a team that does that and rides the high of what was an improved year for Atlanta? Just kind of making those comparisons. Well, as soon as we go to break, Julian announces via his timeline, Adrian Wojnarowski puts out a tweet that says the Atlanta Hawks have actually made a trade. So this is basically real time as we're recording this, around 11:40. So Wojnarowski puts this out. The Atlanta Hawks are trading forward Cam Reddish to the New York Knicks for a deal that includes a protected 2022 first-round pick via Charlotte, and the Knicks also acquire Solomon Hill and a 2025 second-round pick via Brooklyn in the trade. New York is including Kevin Knox in that trade to Atlanta. Those are what the sources are telling ESPN and Adrian Wojnarowski. Now, a little bit of a Charlotte connection, that protected first-round pick that was sent to New York in exchange for Kai Jones, who, by the way, also entered health and safety protocol. So we've got a lot of things coming full circle here. But Kai Jones and health and safety protocol, hopefully he's okay, comes back as soon as possible in case the Hornets need him, even though you don't expect that his rookie year. But what do you make of this trade, Julian? Like, and kind of also looking at Atlanta getting to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. This year, it's been very rough. Like, they're below the Hornets. They're below a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference standings now. John Collins is out here saying, I want to be more involved in the offense. Cam Reddish now being dealt, and he was somebody that was a first-round pick, a young, promising dude. Like, what do you make of what the Hawks are experiencing now and maybe still kind of making those comparisons?
Well, I think what we're gonna have the conversation here shortly just about the Hornets and their rebuild. I think for Atlanta, like, they're still in that process of a rebuild and trying to gain experience with a young team that's centered around Trae Young, and John Collins just seems to always be wanting more out of his role there in Atlanta. I think he's a fantastic player, so I'm kind of surprised that they don't really give him more of an opportunity. And I love Kevin Huerter, but at a point in time, you have to figure out who really is going to be a part of this core moving forward. And the Hornets, in a small part, had to make those decisions this past free agency when they traded Devontae Graham. Same thing with Malik Monk, letting him go in free agency to the LA Lakers. They got to find the right pieces for them. And I think that's one of the part of this trade there for Atlanta is, hey, Cam Reddish, we don't think he's going to fit in long-term for what we're trying to build here. And eventually for the Hornets, maybe this summer or next season, they're going to have to make the same sort of decisions as they try to figure out who exactly is going to be a part of this team long-term. I know for a fact that it's going to be LaMelo Ball. They've invested in Terry Rozier. Gordon Hayward's probably not a tradable contract. But what's the future for guys like PJ Walker or PJ Washington, excuse me? And with a whole Panther crossover.
Can't do it. You can't help it. It's okay.
What's the future for PJ Washington? Same thing with Miles Bridges, too. That seems like a guy you never want to let go. And then you get key pieces like Kelly Oubre have come in, just trying to find that balance of who can help you moving forward and also being savvy and getting those kind of trades like a small market team has to do. Atlanta's not a small market, but in the NBA, they kind of are considered one, which is weird. So it's one of those things that small market teams have to do in trying to figure out when they're building a young team and trying to figure out what their future is going to be as they continue to build.
Well, yeah, let's let that transition us into the rebuild convo and still kind of use that Atlanta comparison because, one, I think it's easy to do when they're only basically 4 hours away. They're one of the closest big-time markets to us here in Charlotte, and you see them making the right decisions, trying to build from the ground up ever since they moved on from their core four, Horford, when they had Kyle Korver, Teague, all those guys down there in Atlanta, Paul Millsap. And then they were like, all right, let's try to do this where we're rebuilding, getting young players and trying to take that next step because we were bottoming out with the all-stars that we had on the team previously. So they make a few draft picks and then boom, they run into Trae Young. They actually collect some picks because Dallas wants to go get Luka Doncic, and then they get Trae Young and they get some picks and they make the most of it, right? Like, they try to, DeAndre Hunter's been really good. Now he's injured a lot. We'll see about his projection towards the future, but they hit on Kevin Huerter. Cam Reddish, at least you turn him into another first-round pick, although it's protected, and maybe Kevin Knox is some kind of reclamation project. I mean, I don't have faith, but you get the idea. Like, they're still doing decent enough things, still drafting Jalen Johnson, getting Sharif Cooper, who fell way low in the draft. You like what they're doing. The one thing I kind of wonder about with Atlanta, though, is, do they have significant enough veteran pieces on that team to try to remain stable? Because they still have a lot of young guys, and I think that's where Charlotte has maybe done a decent job of bringing some of those guys in. I didn't like the contract for Gordon Hayward when it happened. It's still too much. We'll see how it plays out. But Gordon, last night, you could see it certainly helped him, even though he's been inconsistent. That's certainly granted. Terry Rozier, I didn't like that contract, but we know that having a veteran on this team might help them out a little bit. And now, it's kind of the same thing. Hornets making decent picks. Miles Bridges, first round. PJ Washington, first round. You keep making good picks until you just run into some luck, because that's all you can really ask for when rebuilding. And boom, they get the third pick in the lottery, and LaMelo Ball falls to him, and now you're cooking. You've got the star player for the future on top of just good foundation pieces you've drafted in the meantime surrounding that LaMelo pick. And it just seems like, Julian, we're in a place that's better than the year before pretty consistently with this team ever since the second year Borrego coached. And that's something itself to get excited about, because you can pretty visibly see the improvement every single year. And here we are now, at least above 500. We'll see where they go the rest of this season and beyond.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting balancing act that you have to do in having a team be young and grow and develop, and also having some veterans. It feels like to me Atlanta is at least just going to let this thing marinate for a couple seasons. They got lucky last year, got a nice run, but now they're seeing the realities of, we still have a young team that has to go into the war every night in the NBA, and through an 82-game season, they're not going to always have the kind of success that you would hope after a short period of time in the playoffs. Now, for the Hornets, they made smart decisions in trading for Terry Rozier, who had the experience of helping Boston get to that Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals when Kyrie Irving was out, and they eventually lost to LeBron James and the Cavaliers. And you also have Gordon Hayward, who has experience playing in the playoffs back when he was in Boston, but really not that much in Boston, but also back in Utah when he was such a focal point for that team. Unfortunately, when they got down to the play-in tournament last year because of injuries, you had banged up Gordon out there, and that led in large part to them getting embarrassed in a situation, but at least they got the experience. And really the key for the Hornets here, it's been LaMelo Ball. We had talked about the late Rick Bonnell would always talk about the Hornets, what they got to find here in Charlotte is finding that superstar player, whether that's going to be a center, which is obviously still a need here, or it could be a point guard, finding that superstar. As good as Kemba Walker was, he did not transcend the sport like LaMelo Ball might eventually be able to do here, because he's a guy who's been in the spotlight since he was 15 years old, back in Chino Hills, scoring 90 points in a high school game where he was just cherry picking and hitting threes from half court. He's like the one thing at least his dad did for him was put his name out there when Lonzo was going to UCLA and balling out, and you had LiAngelo there in high school too. But the LaMelo, he's been in the spotlight, and he's been able to have that kind of superstar arc where he goes over to the NBL and he comes back to Ohio at Spire Academy, and what he was able to do immediately in the league. Getting him has changed the fortunes for the Hornets. And you give credit to Mitch Kupchak for the draft picks that he's had with PJ Washington, Miles Bridges,
nice
and then
job.
the trades,
excellent,
and then the signing Terry Rozier with the trade, and then also getting Gordon Hayward when a lot of people like myself and yourself did not really love it.
Yeah,
and I was pretty upset just about the way that the Kemba thing was handled, that they got Terry Rozier, even though I figured Terry would be a pretty good player for the Hornets. I did not expect him to shoot the way he's shot so far, at least last season in his career here in Charlotte. But it all comes down to just having that piece that you can have hope in. And when you look at really any franchise in sports, having that one player you can point to and be like, yeah, that guy could maybe lead us to the promised land, certainly helps galvanize a fan base and lead them to believe that they can do something and achieve something that they didn't think they could do before. When you look across town, you don't really have that figure that you can kind of sit there and be like, oh yeah, that guy, he's going to be our franchise. He can help us one day. Our goal.
Well, and that's the worry. You don't want to jump the gun because you have a misread on your organization and you don't have any patience. If anything, Mitch Kupchak has actually exercised too much patience. The only in-season trade he's made so far has been for Brad Wanamaker. But at the time where you're hearing, well, too much patience. No, I'm saying if anything, I don't think so. At the time, the only one that I got a little, I don't know, I disagreed with a little bit was the Marc Gasol trade, just not pulling the trigger on that. I believe that was his first year with Kemba. If you were going to keep Kemba, then you needed to make a move to at least compete in the postseason or even just get there, right? Because they only made it a couple times with Kemba here in the city of Charlotte. That was the only one, but also, I understood it. You don't want to jump the gun. You want to keep as much talent as you possibly have on this roster. You don't want to sacrifice what the future could be. And since then, he's been very patient in season, in the off season. Gordon Hayward was the one that kind of was contrary to that. And I was like, man, so close, right? Like you're so close to having preached all of this patience, and now you just go against it. But, Gordon helps this team as the other guys develop, and maybe he even serves as somewhat of a catalyst in helping these guys develop. Again, I'm not saying he deserves $30 million a year. It's too much.
Sure.
But if that's what you have to dish out, all right. Like maybe I come around to that a little bit. Either way, we've seen the correct steps taken until you run into just some good old-fashioned luck. And I'm not going to apologize for that, nor should any Hornets fan, because you've been downright unlucky so many years. Finally, LaMelo Ball falls to third the same time that you get the third overall selection, and now you have your potential superstar, and it's phenomenal. You're right. Like, that's the key. That's the thing that allows you to feel as good as you do about this franchise.
Yeah, and also just on the Mitch Kupchak patience thing, like, look at where Marc Gasol went. He went to Toronto, who ended up winning the NBA championship that year. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to make a trade like that unless you think you can win an NBA title. And if anyone knows how to win an NBA title, well, it's obviously the owner, Michael Jordan, who, things have been different, and maybe a little bit of his input has kind of stunted the growth of this organization in the past before Mitch Kupchak. But Mitch, as a general manager and coming from LA, knows what a championship team looks like. When he looks at this roster, he probably doesn't see a championship team. So it's like, I'm not going to make that decision right now.
Yeah.
But I do believe at the point where he believes they can be a championship team, he will absolutely make the trade necessary for the Hornets to get over the hump. I'll also say this. We talk about the luck and the unlucky part of the Hornets. Have we thought about, maybe this is a longer conversation, but think about it. Like, the ping pong balls that screwed the Hornets over and sent the league-owned team, the New Orleans Hornets at the time, or whatever they were, I guess, Anthony Davis. Mm-hmm. Maybe we actually got lucky with that, because Anthony Davis didn't really achieve anything in New Orleans, has spent his entire career basically being unhealthy, and wouldn't have stayed in Charlotte long-term anyway. We'll see what the future holds with LaMelo Ball, but having a player like him who seems to fit the culture perfectly in this coaching staff, especially James Borrego and the relationship they have, and I don't know, everything he said so far makes it seem that he actually wants to be here long-term, opposed to leveraging this career in Charlotte so he can go back to play for the Lakers. Maybe the Hornets actually didn't get all that unlucky after all with Anthony Davis, because maybe we'd had a short-term happiness, but will we have ever achieved what we would hope to achieve had Kemba and Anthony Davis been on the same roster?
Yeah, I think you're still probably in a similar area, though. Like, and I understand your point, but the thing is, when we talk about the luck with LaMelo Ball being here, that was still a team that should not have been picking at number 3 overall. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So if you finish with a similar record based on the fallout of whatever alternate universe has Anthony Davis on the Charlotte roster, then it probably looks pretty similar, and you get lucky getting LaMelo Ball up there. But it's a good point. Like, I understand what you're saying with Anthony Davis coming here. Then it's almost fool's gold to an extent, because he's always going to go to a bigger market. Like, maybe, especially if you don't have any belief that Rich Cho, Michael Jordan at the time, anybody in the front office with any kind of authority
exactly
was going to make the right decision. Like, I understand.
The structure was not going to be good enough. Like with Higgins back then and then Cho, right. The structure was never going to be conducive for that being a long-term success with Anthony Davis and even with Kemba Walker. Now, could they have won a playoff series at some point in time? It's possible. Enough talent on that roster, at least those two guys, that can carry you through 7 games. Were they ever going to achieve conference finals with that pairing? And that's also, it's one of the big what ifs in Charlotte sports history, especially when it comes to this team. But I kind of look at it now and just looking at where his career has gone. Yes, he won a championship in the pandemic season in the bubble, but Anthony Davis probably ended up being a Hall of Famer. But has his career really gone the way that a lot of people thought it was going to go when he came out of Kentucky?
I mean, no. And here's the thing, though, because the Hornets are more successful than and have better hope than they've ever had since the Bobcats, like, that allows us to have that take now.
Exactly.
Before this, we couldn't even have that take. And it's a pretty mild one when discussing how badly do you want a playoff series win, because he did accomplish that with New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was the Pelicans that got the sweep over Portland. Yeah. Remember Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, like, hey, they were supposed to put together a really nice series, and bam, they got destroyed. Anthony Davis was just a beast. And so you had the playoff series win, something that this franchise hasn't. But now because they've had this success, which is like 4 games above 500, 3 games. Now that allows us to have that take. And it's a beautiful place to be, Julian. Like now you can utter those words. Was it really all that bad that we don't have Anthony Davis a part of this franchise's history? That's where we are. And you know what? I love every bit of it. I'm sorry, though, that the Panthers are kind of not in that situation. And at least you're able to fire off some takes, some fiery ones about the Carolina Panthers. People should listen to Julian. Go find him on Twitter at Julian Council. You can find the show right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's Locked On Panthers. Julian making some great points about this team, where they should head towards the future, what they've done and not accomplished this past season. You holding up okay? Like, is this like good? Is this fun for you, or is this like awful for you to talk about?
Well, listen, I'm fine. Anyone who knows me well knows that I've always cared way more about the Hornets than the Panthers. Mm-hmm. Like, I obviously want the Panthers to win, but I'm not going to my Sunday is not going to be ruined because they lose a football game.
You can be more objective about them.
Yeah, that thing, I've always been way more objective about the Panthers, and I've always just been way more of a fan with the Hornets. It's why I was totally wrong about the Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier things, because I'm way too emotional when it comes to the Hornets. But with the Panthers, I've never really had that strong of an emotional attachment to the team. Like, obviously, growing up here, season ticket holder, like, I like the team a lot. I want them to win, but I'm not going to lose my mind over it. So I think that's why I'm able to do the podcast, because I can actually be objective and not freak out over every small thing that happens, like the current fan base is doing right now. Every small thing Matt Rule does, everyone wants him basically run out of town, to the point where the guy can't even go to Hornets games with his family, which is absolutely ridiculous. That people think this is like proper behavior.
Look, man, and I've heard some people even embrace that. I'm not.
This is not Philadelphia.
I don't even care. The thing is, I'm extremely critical of Matt Rule. I think he's been pretty damn awful, and I think press conferences, part of what SportsCenter CLT is solely built on, it's all audio, and so I listen to every single press conference, and I've noticed how bad he's been at them really after the Philadelphia game, when it was just such a awful, awful loss. Like, we can go back and see signs of that, where he's blaming Teddy Bridgewater for everything. He finds a scapegoat. Yeah. And then early on this year, it's like, wait, this is becoming a pretty bad theme. I think Matt Rule is actually the worst. Like, he's awful at handling press conferences and taking accountability. I also don't care enough to say fire Matt Rule and chant that at the Spectrum Center when he goes and it makes an appearance there, or when he doesn't make an appearance there. Like, I'm kind of with you on that. Don't like what he's done at all. Also, don't care enough to boo when I'm just watching the Hornets.
Especially after the Hornets had a great win, like the best performance of the season, and you're like, oh, we're not really focused on the Hornets. Let's talk about the bad team in town. Like, it's weird behavior to me. But hey, free country, act the way you want, but maybe don't be a jackhole out in public and make a guy and his family feel like they can't go to Harris Teeter without being chastised by some moron living down in Monroe.
I like Julian's life advice today. I like your actions more than I like your words, and don't be a jackhole. We should have a life advice segment with Julian Council joining us here on the Hornets podcast, and he'll be joining us to celebrate even more, hopefully some wins down the road. It certainly looks good for them.